Hello everyone, my name is Rogelio and I'm going to be talking about why there should be more awareness on domestic abuse, and hopefully by the end of the speech you all will become advocates for putting a stop on domestic abuse. Women are much more likely to be victims of intimate partner violence, with 85% of domestic abuse victims being women and 15% men. Domestic abuse is one of the few topics that not many like to talk about because they are afraid that if someone finds out, they will be judged for it. They will be told that it is their fault when really it's not. We should raise awareness on domestic abuse because this is one of the most underreported crimes we have. For the National Coalition Against Domestic Abuse, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Domestic abuse is shown in many movies in which the woman is constantly the victim of such abuse. For example, the movie Enough, featuring Jennifer Lopez, shows how her character was being abused by her husband, yet she never tells anyone about the abuse because she is afraid of her husband or having it covered by his cop friends. This is possibly one of the main reasons many women do not report this abuse, because they feel it may be covered by and make them seem like liars. Her character did not report either because she did not want to risk the chance of being killed or leaving him either, which is a fear that many domestic abuse victims suffer. Jana Kasperkovich from The Guardian mentions that 1 in 4 women will be beaten or abused by someone in her lifetime. Every day, 3 women die because of domestic violence, and about 75% of victims who had lost their lives to domestic violence have been killed in the process of leaving or after leaving. We cannot let this continue to be an underreported crime any longer. Some of the things that need to be done regarding raising awareness for domestic abuse are helping put a stop to domestic abuse as the most underrated crime. We need to realize that domestic abuse occurs to both men and women, and domestic victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and other disorders. Instead of ignoring the fact that domestic abuse does occur, we need to report it so that it is no longer known as an underreported crime. We need to let any domestic abuse victims know that they should not be afraid to let someone know what is going on. We need to make sure that victims of domestic abuse know there are people who will support them no matter what, and they will not judge them either. We need to make sure that they take out a protective order after they report the abuse. Have them go to a safe place, such as a domestic violence shelter, a trusted friend, or a family member's home, or somewhere in which they feel safe as well. We need to make sure that victims of domestic abuse have safe spaces and people whom they can trust. The Clark County Prosecution's Attorney What to Do If You Are a Victim of Domestic Abuse article mentions that one should seek the support of caring people. Tell someone you trust about the abuse. That they may be a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a coworker, or staff members of support agencies. Talk to them and talk to them in a private, safe place. One does not need to face abuse alone. They also mention that one should have a safety plan. If your partner is abusive, have a plan to protect yourself and your children in case you need to leave quickly. This is not just for women of domestic abuse, but men as well. Men are also victims of domestic abuse. It doesn't only occur to women, it occurs to both men and women. The National Coalition Against Domestic Abuse mentions 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been victims of some form of physical violence by an intimate partner within their lifetime. The National Coalition Against Domestic Abuse also mentions that 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked by an intimate partner during their lifetime to the point in which they felt very fearful or believed that they or someone close to them would be harmed or killed. No one should have to live like this. One should not be afraid to report this abuse to anyone. Despite many findings that show almost equal amount of abuse perpetrated against men and women, the media and government focus the amount of attention on the female victims of domestic violence. In a conflicting survey taken by the CDC in 2010, it was found that 40% of victims of severe physical domestic violence are men. It was found that men more likely to be made fun of or will not be believed on the fact that they suffered domestic abuse at the hands of their female partners or even male partners. If if men do report the abuse, they should not be mocked or laughed at. Those men who do report physical violence are more likely to be ridiculed both by law enforcement and by the public than women are. There needs to be more advocacy for both men and women domestic abuse victims. We need to make sure that there are more than enough shelters for both men and women all around the world. Domestic victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and other disorders. We need to make sure that we are there for someone who went through domestic abuse. We cannot simply let them get through this alone. We never know if they need help and don't know how to ask for it. By simply saying, "I'm here for you," to someone who went through domestic abuse can go a long way for one. Per the Joyful Foundation's take on the effect of domestic abuse, many people who go through traumatic events may find that it can take some time to readjust and cope for a period after the event. The residual mental, physical, and spiritual effect of domestic violence can permeate the daily lives of survivors, which makes it difficult to heal. One's life is never the same after they suffer domestic violence at the hands of their partner or spouse. Domestic violence is known to trigger depression in most domestic abuse cases. Depression remains the most common symptoms exhibited by survivors of domestic violence. Per studies done in 2000, 60% of battered women reported feeling sad, depressed for extended periods of time. The Joyful Foundation states PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a mental health condition that is triggered by the terrifying event. Some common symptoms associated with PTSD are flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable thoughts about the event. Even if there are more physical evidence that one suffered abuse at the hands of their loved ones, one doesn't mean that they still don't suffer some sort of mental disorder. To increase awareness for domestic abuse, we should put a stop to domestic abuse at the most underrated crime. Find resources for both men and women, since domestic abuse occurs to both men and women, and help them receive the help they need as effects to domestic abuse. We need to make sure that society continues to be aware of domestic abuse and what they can do to stop it, because one never knows if it will happen to them or someone they love. No man or woman should ever live their lives in fear of their partner or their own shadows. They should never have to cover up bruises or black eyes.